Hey, welcome back to Frequency This. I'm Rich, and with me, as always, is John. Say hi, John, and Dave.
Hey.
Hey, there we go. So, on our last episode, we talked about our three bands that influenced us each differently, and we invited you to make your own comments and talk about what influenced you. If you did that, thank you so much, and thank you very much for tuning into our YouTube channel. Today, we're going to extend that conversation, and we're going to talk about 5 more bands that, while they didn't make our top 3, that does not mean that they did not influence us in any way, shape, or form. They actually, this will prove that we had a conversation at the beginning of the last episode how we just have been friends for so long because music has been kind of our centralized focus of that friendship, and we've kind of just spun out on all these other bands. Well, these bands that we like to talk about and banter back and forth on, they've all influenced and impacted us in some big way, or they actually trace back to these bands that we're talking about, some of which we're talking about today. So, John, why don't you lead off with? I put you on the spot. You're really Johnny on the spot. How about that? Why don't you give us your first album?
Okay.
First artist.
You guys don't have to feel like you have to go in the same order I'm going in, but I'm actually going to go in the least most to the most. So this is my 8th most influential band, I guess, since we already talked about our top 3 and we're doing 5 more today. And this one, we talked about having influences from our family, you know, our family members introducing us to stuff, or friends being over at Teddy's house, that kind of a thing. This band, I totally don't know where it came from. I'm probably top 40 radio. And I bought the CD. It was my first rock CD that I bought. I don't think I had a CD player quite yet. I think I was still saving up, like 8th grade-ish or some around 8th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. And I was at my cousin's house, whose father was an architect, so he had all the latest gear. He had those, what are those speakers where they look like they're partitions for you to change your clothes behind or something? Those huge planar or whatever speakers. Yep. Anyway, amazing setup the guy had. First person I ever knew with a CD player. So we were at the store and I bought Van Halen's 5150. But what I'll show you here is the first one. This is an amazing album. 5150 is great. It was a lot of fun. That's a great party. That's a lot of fun. But 1984 and the first Van Halen albums were so essential for me. One of our friends, one of our mutual friends, Arlen, I was with him when he bought his first CD, and he also did not yet have a CD player. So he actually let me borrow it for a while. And his was Fair Warning, the 1981 Van Halen album. Mm-hmm. So yeah, Van Halen's a pretty big deal, and just a fun time when you listen to them. But then also you get that artistic amazingness of Eddie's guitar playing. You know?
Yeah.
So and I'll take either singer. You know, that becomes a thing, right? We could do a whole episode on, Hagar versus Roth. And sorry, Dave, Sharon just...
I know. I wish they would have done a couple more with him because I think they could have had something better, but it didn't work. It didn't work the way it could have been. But anyway,
right. Yeah, I was so disappointed it didn't work because we're huge Extreme fans.
Oh, yeah.
And that would have been great
should
if
have.
that worked. But yeah, Van Halen, love him. Still listen to him a lot today. All right. Who's next?
Dave. All right. I'll jump in there. All right. So I'll take your cue and I'll just flip the way I was going to go. And this is actually a band that they were influential, but later, because they came around a little bit later, but they've been around a while enough, or they've been broken up enough. But I got to go with it's a duo. Their use of color was so fun. I'll stop teasing it at that. But the White Stripes.
Oh, yeah.
It's got just a couple of their examples of, sorry about that's better. The glare is not quite as bad that angle. But Rich, you were along. Was it you, Dan, and I that did the White Stripes show? Is that
the Glass House?
Oh,
we were 20 feet away from Jack White.
Unbelievable that some of the time there are those certain bands, and like the White Stripes are one of these. You can throw like the Black Keys in the same kind of a thing where you've got a duo, and you just go, how does this much sound and raw power come out of so few instruments and so little? It's just overwhelming. But to have seen them live and to continue following Jack White's career with whether it was the Raconteurs or his current solo stuff. Oh shoot, there's one more. The Dead Weather is another band that he had for a time. But that one for me, the White Stripes opens the door for kind of that retro garage rock sort of a thing. And he is such a fan of music, in what he's doing with Third Man Records and putting out old Motown stuff and all sorts of things. I don't necessarily track with some of the stuff that he goes after on that, but it's still just, musically, he's the kind of guy, I don't know, I saw the documentary or whatever it was, the thing where it's like he and Jimmy Page and the Edge, and I could have done without the Edge because I'm just the guy that goes, okay, you're looking at two master guitarists, and I've never understood why the Edge is in that conversation. If you're a U2 fan, I apologize. I have a few friends who are. I got one colleague who's a huge U2 fan to the point like he's followed them, like he's gone to like 3, 4, 5 shows in a row as they go on tour. And I'm like, I don't know that I would go to one of them, but fine. But they get in this whole conversation and they're playing each other's music, and Jack's talking about basically like HomeKit building his own guitars and so forth. And it's just the music knowledge this man has is just unbelievable. And to think just, you've got anthems like Seven Nation Army that just become this worldwide global event kind of a thing where people who have no idea who he is can hum along to his song because there's such a catchiness to it. And yet at the same time, there's his music, their music at the time as the White Stripes, there's this raw energy to it. I just love that band.
Yeah. And I track with you on Jack White, and having seen that show, that is one of those where, you're going to tell your kids, it's kind of like how 30 years ago you hear people say, oh yeah, I saw Bruce Springsteen in Asbury Park in 72 before his first album came out. That's kind of how that was because they hadn't quite broke big yet.
I've introduced my youngest, who's 12 at this point, I've introduced him to Jack White, and there were times when like his last couple of solo albums that he would we'd play him on repeat as I would drive him places. And I'm hoping things time out well where he gets slightly, I'm ready to say, all right, let's go to a concert, and Jack's touring, because I'm like, if I can take you to like your first concert and that's the one, I think I'm going to be setting him up musically just perfectly.
Oh yeah, and maybe even set the bar too high because Jack.
Yeah, well, also true, but
yeah. All right, so mine, and I'm not going to go from 8 to 4. I'm just going to pick some because really, I was telling these guys before we started recording, this is hard. I could put like 12 bands into this, and I'm sure we'll probably do like an honorable. We should do like an honorable mention, just like not necessarily in depth, but just say, oh yeah, these bands are great too. But we'll talk about that later. So my band is going to piggyback on a band that John picked in his top 3, and that is indeed the mighty Led Zeppelin. Because again, I said in the first episode, my brother was listening to Black Sabbath. Well, he was also listening to Led Zeppelin too. And Led Zeppelin as well, not just Led Zeppelin 2. He listened to the whole discography. And I think it's also important to note that when, this was when I was like 9 or 10 years old, John Bonham had just died and the band had broken up. And so back in 80, 81, Zeppelin was a huge deal because of that death. And there's there's a period between that and them getting back together in 85 in Live Aid where people were like, oh, will we ever see those guys get together again? And so there's this mythos that came out of those conversations. And then when you would hear, Led Zeppelin 4, of course, or the first record, but then you would dig deeper into like stuff like Physical Graffiti or Presence or House of the Holy, those album covers that Hypnosis did, and then you hear the range of sounds that would come out of that. Like House of the Holy is a great example of that because you have like, you have the straightforward rock, that the layered guitars of the song remains the same, just kind of like the swing at the end of the ocean at the end of the album. Then you have a total prog thing with no quarter in the middle of that, and it's just like it was just so great. And that's like a microcosm of what Zeppelin's albums were, particularly after the first couple, where like, hey, we don't necessarily need to like just rip off Willie Dixon and Robert Johnson every time we record a song, and which they still continue to do anyway. But that's beside the point. It worked because they were great, and yeah, that is still an influence. You talk about the heavy metal, the hard rock, all of that. That comes from them as well. So yeah, Zeppelin.
Cool.
Yeah. Great band, great pick. All right, I think it's me, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to show an album, and I'm not trying to say this is the greatest album ever from this influential artist. It's just the one that was close by. But mine seventh most influential artist is Genesis. I've got this one today.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good one though.
Wind and Wuthering. And Dave, you know that it's the one that was close by to grab because it's the most recent one I bought when I was hanging out with you in November. Anyway.
Yep.
So Genesis, I was introduced to Genesis, well, obviously by the radio. Okay, we're of an age where we were in high school or junior high or whatever middle school when Invisible Touch came out. But I also remember, we're the MTV generation, right? So I remember, I think, videos from the self-titled album being played on MTV, but basically like pop hits, that kind of thing. And I was introduced to, by of all people, my youth pastor, who had a former life as an FM rock DJ.
Yeah, and knowing him, that just totally makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he kind of says like, "Oh, you think you like Genesis, huh? Well, I'm about to blow your mind," which I think my sister said from the previous episode we did when I was talking about Led Zeppelin.
It's the thing to say in those situations,
right? But he put on the musical box from Nursery Crime. This is his intro. This is him saying there's more to Genesis than Invisible Touch.
Oh.
Yeah.
And he puts on the musical box, which for those of you here who may not be familiar, it is a 10-minute like tour de force, starting off with this very soft, almost pastoral setting of almost
like a harpsichord.
Yeah, like a fairy tale type idea, right? Or something like that in the lyrics. But I tell you, the life-changing moment, you guys know where I'm going, whatever that is, right? 4 minutes and 45 seconds or something, when Steve Hackett's guitar solo starts off with the nastiest snarl ever. I was like, oh my goodness. Because I think by then I was starting to get into a lot of hard rock, and I was already liking Van Halen. I was about to, or if not already, getting into Metallica. So to hear this from this band that was doing, she seems to have that invisible touch. Like, it was, what? How can this be the same? What is happening? And ever since that moment, I had to get everything from Genesis. And they are huge. I'm probably a top 3 band of all time for me now. Now, that's weird. I put them as the 7th most influential. And that's because we're talking about the way I'm talking, at least I'm taking the approach of like how a musical identity is formed, like how I went from one influence to another, or how I discovered, new genres, new music, and how I was introduced to it. So I just thought this getting introduced to Genesis that way, both sides of Genesis, it was wow. I didn't do any drugs back then, but if I had, I feel like it would have been. I should probably clarify when I said back then. I haven't really done any drugs.
Thank you. Thank you.
Here you go. A little bit of this, and that's it. But anyway, there were no drugs involved with my discovery of Genesis or Led Zeppelin or Pink Floyd or any of them.
Okay, Rich, give. Why don't you? Yeah.
All right, I can go next, and it's actually appropriate because you're gonna like force my hand here, because I was gonna mention Genesis a little bit later, but I'm gonna mention Genesis now so we can piggyback on that conversation, because I kind of had the same thing where it's like, oh, this is like that's all, and this is, you know, the goofy illegal alien video that shan't be named, and then, you know, like Invisible Touch and all these hits, and, you know, Phil Collins recording with Philip Bailey and all this stuff. And so I remember I was in high school, and I got into a conversation with my teachers. I don't even remember what the subject was, and we were the subject of the class, but it was like we were like after a test or whatever, and whatever. So we were talking, and we were talking about music. I made a comment about Pink Floyd, which earlier I mentioned in the previous episode was a huge influence. And I said, yeah, I can't think of any other band that would take up a whole album side with one song. And my teacher looks at me and goes, oh no, they're out there. Genesis did this. They took up an entire side with the song Supper's Ready. And I'm like, no, they're Genesis? The Invisible? No. I kind of blew it off. But then a couple years later, I'm listening to a hard rock station on a Sunday, one of the local hard rock stations in LA on a Sunday. And Sundays when they usually have special programming. And they had the Sunday morning show where it was dedicated to progressive rock. And I threw it on there, and I heard this phenomenal like keyboard solo on this Moog. And I was like, whoa, this has to be Emerson, Lake and Palmer, because I immediately thought of that's the same kind of keyboard sound that Lucky Man, you know, finishes off on. So I'm like, oh, what is this? And then I click on, and then I hear Peter Gabriel's voice. And I'm like, wait, this is the guy who just released like So. This is Sledgehammer. What? This does not compute. So I had no idea that Gabriel was the original singer. It turns out it was In the Cage off of Live Lies Down on Broadway.
Mm.
And I'm like, holy crap. This whole thing. And so where Pink Floyd was my intro to prog rock, Genesis, and that moment specifically kicked down the door. And I quickly became obsessed with that band all throughout college. You know, and still it's one of the reasons why, I mean, I love all those different some of those different offshoots from that band, you know, Gabriel's solo career, Colin's side project with Brand X. But yeah, that really was the influence that, like I said, I was a prog fan before, but Genesis made me a prog fan. So yeah. Dave.
Nice.
So
All
Dave,
right.
before we go to your next pick, was last year or something, didn't you do a challenge to yourself to hear every Genesis album and every solo side project of a Genesis member?
Yeah. So I have a ranked list
Did it come
of
up to like, was it like 53 albums?
well, I'd have to look up how many. It was extensive, and I had kind of it took something, and it's interesting because I came into it. I grew in appreciation of like, say, like the Phil Collins solo stuff. I came into that kind of looking at it going, the poppy whatever. I'm like, oh, I'm just not there. I kind of enjoyed it better than I thought I would. But yeah, no, I went through the whole, you know, even the random, you know, bank stuff and the Phillips private parts related whatevers. And I've actually now since then bought a couple of his, it sounds weird to say I bought his private parts, but bought his private parts albums, at least a couple of them. Anyway, made that sound awkward, didn't I?
Because at least you didn't call him his nickname. Said I bought Ant's private parts.
Well, then there's that. But
yeah, we could get shut down on YouTube.
Could be.
There's
you know, but
love those as well. Multiple private parts.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And because it is. I mean, they have an extensive, you know, instead of saying like a back catalog, it's side catalog, you want to call it that, maybe.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of diversity to it and the different directions they've gone down. And I mean, and I'd have to filter stuff in there because there's now more material than it was even then when I did it, because, you know, Steve Hackett has continued to put out new music
Every 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, every time you turn around, he's cranked out another one, and just did a concept album like a month or two ago, and just great stuff. But yeah, that's a band that really produced a lot and have continued. At least the varying members have put out a lot of stuff. I mean, Gabriel, has out with a new album in first one in 20 years or something like that. So yeah,
good one. All right, what's your next pick, Dave?
Okay, so I'm going to go in my next one. This is one. So John, this will be a fun connection point for you, because I remember bringing this CD over to your house and bringing you back musically to some stuff that you hadn't been digging into for a while. The Porcupine Tree and In Absentia.
Yeah,
what a fun album. And so I grabbed a couple others. You had Dead Wing, which great. On the Sunny Side of Life, interesting. Even to the point, and I pulled this one off a little month or so ago. Didn't anticipate that I was going to find a vinyl copy of this sucker, but it was at a half price books, and true to their name, this was half the price that it would typically. I think it would have been more of a $30 thing. I think $15 or something like that for this thing. I'm like, good grief. Yeah. I look at it going, should I get this? And then there was a point afterwards, I'm like, can I live with myself if I don't?
Right.
But Steven Wilson and the varying incarnations that he's had, both as a Porcupine Tree, from its early stages into the full formed band, into the solo stuff, and all the varying other things that he's done here and there, and the producer he's been, and kind of remixing all sorts of classic rock albums and that kind of a thing. He is musically, well, to some degree, he's musically all over the place. With his solo work, he's definitely been that. But you go back to an album like In Absentia, and just that was, I mean, the early Porcupine Tree, much more atmospheric. He gets into kind of the heavy, more prog metal feel when you get into In Absentia and Dead Wing and so forth, but just musically rich and deep and challenging and rhythmically complex, and it's just great music. And so the Porcupine Tree had to be on my list.
Yeah, dude, that was a life-changing moment, and it was in 2005. Like, I'm an adult,
right?
I got kids, and but what happened was somewhere around 91 or whatever that was, right, when Jellyfish came out, and Jellyfish is actually not on my list, and I don't mean to steal anyone's thunder if it is, but gosh, maybe Jellyfish should be on my list, because they were so amazing and blew me away in such a way. I stopped listening to prog and metal, and I spent the next 14 years trying to find the next Jellyfish, right? Famously only put out 2 albums and broke up. Power pop had a bit of a resurgence in the 90s. So, the International Pop Overthrow festivals in Southern California, right? You pay $8 and you get to see like 8 bands, and you get to do that for every day for 2 weeks. Well, amazing.
Yeah.
So we had to move out to the boonies in order to afford our first house. And we said, we need to reconnect with our friends and have a barbecue. So that was like 2005. We had a barbecue or whatever that was. And Dave came. Dave was the first to arrive. So we had a few moments there to say, like, so what are you listening to, man? He was like, oh, let me show you. Let me run out to the car.
Yep.
And he comes back with 2 bands that you must have just known were gonna resonate with me. And it was Porcupine Tree, and then it was the latest release from Dream Theater, which at that time was Octavarium, I think. Life-changing moment, man. I was all back in then. It was one of those things where it was like, and I had, I hate to admit this, maybe I have to edit this part out, but I had sold a whole bunch of my heavy metal CDs when I became a dad, because I thought, I'm a dad, I need to grow up, it's time to be responsible, and I want to finance a new computer. So I sold a whole bunch of my heavy metal CDs. I've since been buying them back and getting them back. But yeah, man, that barbecue, Dave, that moment, oh man, Porcupine Tree is so good.
Yep.
So good. That's a great pick. I did not pick them. Wow.
Yeah. So what did you pick then, John?
Am I go?
Segway.
Segue.
Well, I mentioned it in my first video, and I want to say this is the part where I'm not mentioning jellyfish.
You've twice now not mentioned them. Good job.
Well,
Like jellyfish.
I grew up in a house where this was played all the time. And I want to say that the combination of what I'm about to show you and the Beatles leads to jellyfish.
Okay.
And that's the Beach Boys.
Yep.
Mm.
And again, like I mentioned in the first video, this is my dad's actual record that he played for us when we were kids. And so those harmonies, well, I mean, Dave, we just talked about Porcupine Tree. One of the most amazing things about Porcupine Tree to me is the way they bring in those CSNY style harmonies.
Mm-hmm.
I love vocal harmonies. I lost a bet in college. Rich knows where I'm going with this.
It's one of my favorite stories.
A girl friend, a friend of ours that named Mary, was like, bro, all your money goes to CDs. She's like, I bet you can't go whatever number of weeks it was. I bet you can't go 4 weeks or whatever, a month without buying a CD. And I was like, yes, I can. No problem. Well, during that month, I went with my mom and my grandparents to the regional competitions of the International Barbershop Quartet Association or something. And I was so blown away by a performance by the Gas House Gang that I bought their CD on the spot at the Barbershop Quartet competition. And I lost the bet to Mary. And so I had to buy her a copy of The Lost Boys on VHS.
In your defense, that Gas House Gang CD was pretty dang good.
Yeah, it's really
Their
good.
version of the Elements is fantastic.
Yes. It's really good. And so the Beach Boys just put that love of those harmonies, the way that you could take multiple singers and almost turn it into an orchestra. You know, I mean, it's like to this day, I mean, just recently I fell back down. Every once in a while, I fall down the rabbit hole of a cappella pop covers, you know, which most of the time are from like collegiate groups. And I just love vocal harmonies being put together like that. The Beach Boys do that for me. And it's more so about the sound than it is the lyrical content. I was never a surfer. I'm not into all that. And I didn't get, too much into car culture and all that stuff. But boy, you line me up with some good vocal harmonies, and I am a sucker for that. I'm in.
Very cool. That's a solid pick.
Oh yeah, excellent.
I mean, yeah. And I will say, back to your Stephen Wilson and Porcupine Tree, I think eventually we're going to talk about bands that are currently or acts that are currently influencing us.
Yes, we will get to that.
Yeah, the tricky thing about a guy like Stephen Wilson is that the dude is still putting out music that is still highly influential to my musical tastes.
Yeah.
So this is why, for me, I didn't put him on this list, because for me, he's still taking me down music exploration that I'm not expecting to go down to.
Sure, that's fair.
So instead, I'm going to pick a group that definitely informed my interest in power metal. That would be Iron Maiden.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because, we joke around. It's like, before they added keyboards, we would say, it's like, Iron Maiden was one keyboardist away from being the first prog metal band. And then they added keyboards, and Seventh Son of Seventh Son became a prog metal band. But I mean, just even going before Bruce Dickinson shows up with Paul Di'Anno on vocals, I just remember, and again, I keep going back to listening to these records with not only my brother, but also my father. And, my brother had a copy of Maiden's first album, and we heard the song Family Opera, which is like their big epic song that's like multiple suites,
Yeah.
multiple suite style song. And we heard that. I was like, wow, this is unlike anything that I've heard. Where just these sweeping, things, and then you find out later on as an adult where their influences are like Wishbone Ash and stuff like that, and then you can connect the dots a little bit. But then the thing that really sold me was Number of the Beast. Particularly, I remember a moment when my brother had just brought that album home, and my dad looked at the album cover. He's like, "Hey, what's this Hallowed Be Thy Name song about? Can we hear it? Can I hear it?" And so we put it on there, and it starts slow, and then it builds up, and then it just shreds. And all of us were like, "What is this?" Mind you, Number of the Beast came out in '82, so I'm like 10. But because of all these influences, I knew Sabbath, I knew Zeppelin, I knew AC/DC, all these other bands, all these hard rock bands, but this was unlike anything that I had heard. I mean, like I said, Sabbath had some prog metal progressive moments in there, but this was something that was just somehow even more forceful with the dual guitar attack of Smith and Murray and Dickinson's vocals and Harris's bass line, and it was just, yeah. And I was hooked. And then they go off and do Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is like, you could do that? And then the older you get, the more you start connecting the dots with some of these lyrics. Like, okay, they sung about this TV show called The Prisoner, or this song is based on Dune. And it just blows you away. And that's why I thought, yeah, these guys aren't the devil's music. They're nerds.
Yeah.
They're awesome. Awesome nerds.
Rock on, nerds.
Totally.
Come on. Anthrax has an album where they do reference to Stephen King's stories and Judge Dredd. That's high-level dorkdom.
Well, yeah, it's Scott Ian is just a gigantic comic book nerd. I mean, just spectacularly.
It shows.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went to a private high school. We didn't have uniforms, but we weren't allowed to wear like rock band T-shirts, stuff like that.
Oh yeah, I tried doing it with a patch on the jean jacket thing, and there's like no dice on that one either.
Yeah. So we had an assignment in one of my classes to do a dramatic reading of like a poem or something, but it was like a dramatic reading where you know what that is. You get into it, and I said that I wanted to do I had a condensed version of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's epic poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and this is all I'm telling my teacher, is that I would like to do. My dramatic reading will be a condensed, abridged version of the Coleridge epic poem, Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And he was like, okay, cool. So it's my turn to go. And I got up in front of the class with the CD, and I made a big show of it being an Iron Maiden CD, and opening it up and taking the booklet out and opening the booklet to the lyric page for the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And the whole time I'm reading it, the class is, because of the way I'm holding it, right? The class is being shown this Iron Maiden cover. It was awesome.
That's great.
Nice.
Love that band. Not one of my most influential, because I came to them a little bit late. I mean, that was around the time I was getting into them.
Yeah.
I want to say junior year of high school. Great band.
Yeah, they were ones, they could have been on a list. They're not. There's one where I think, because I was listening to them, there's others that if we do any sort of honorable mentions to things that didn't quite make the cut, they'd show up in here. But I was listening to them regularly in high school. I think the lack of influences that kind of dropped off, but I will still throw them on again today. And I still remember. So one of the most bizarre, how did I get my wife to go to this concert moments was taking her to see an Iron Maiden. And they play, they just start, she had moments where she's just like, what am I witnessing here? what even is this? She paid me back years later, where she would like hang on to this. She's like, you had me there and they're chanting their weird 666 things and what is going on and what did you take me to? And the payback was eventually, she's like, I'm going to have to take you to a country concert. And we were able to negotiate it to be Chris Stapleton, which is passable and actually fairly good for a country artist, because he's bluesy enough for it to work for me. But neither of those are my next pick, because it's we're on to me again, right? Is that that's where we're at? Yes. Okay. So that weird setup. I'm gonna go in an entirely different direction, because you know, Rich, you talk about Maiden, and kind of, you know, they were one keyboard away from being the first progressive metal band. Well, the first for me, the prog metal band proper, that just set the stage and said, "Gauntlet, here's what this genre means."
Yep.
Freshman year college, Dream Theater, and Pull Me Under comes out off their Images and Words album, and I have bought every album ever since. Unbelievable. The fact that, you know, Portnoy's back in the band is great. I had the worst luck for the longest time, because I have not seen them in concert with Portnoy, which kills me, considering that I've been a fan since '92, and because, like, for whatever reason, I was always out of town when they were touring, and I just would miss repeatedly. I've seen him in multiple other bands, but not with his original band. But it's an absolute must when they're touring again. But, you know, those, you got, you know, Awakes, another great one. And, you know, John, since you referenced Octavarium, just, you know, happen to have that. Just, you know, talk musicality and the structures and the, you know, the depth of construction of all the varying things, and the number of side projects that have come out of there, and the different musicians that have been a part of things. And, you know, you dig deep into who they are and who's been a part of them, and you go off into, you know, Kevin Moore doing Chroma Key, and you do Derek Sherinian and all his side projects, Planet X and various things, and you find out all the side things that Jordan Rudess has done, and that's just covering the keyboard players.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, Petrucci has done a couple of solo albums, and, you know, Mangini is just was a beast on the drums, and fantastic. But then you have, you know, Portnoy that bookends him now, who has done, I mean, what is he? I think he appears on over 100 albums at this point.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
The number of things that he will just, yeah, okay, I'll play on that. Yeah, okay, I'll play on that. And, you know, you watch the videos of him where he's, you know, they I think they did one where it was a oh shoot, what's the Nickelback, and they're playing like a Nickelback song, and he just, like, cold, they just start playing it absent the drum parts, and just have him make up a drum part as he goes, and probably did a better one than the original. This is the musicianship of this band. They are unbelievable from a technical standpoint, but there's a power to their music. There's a strength to it. I didn't mention James LaBrie in here. I'll admit, he's not my favorite prog metal singer. I think there's some other singers that could be, but, you know, I wouldn't want them to swap anybody out in this moment, because, I mean, he's been with them. So, yeah, great. He's actually done some interesting side project stuff as well. That's been kind of, not the strongest, but I've appreciated, you know, what he brings. He brings a good stage presence. He's been good with them, you know. Are there stronger singers? I'm trying not to be overly critical at that point, so maybe I need to stop here for a minute. But I love.
He's an acquired taste.
He is. You know, and I will admit at this point, his voice has probably seen better days, and that's a little unfortunate for him. But, you know, this is a band that, you know, you can pull out their back catalog and just go to town. And I have to resist, because they've been cranking out all this, you know, the Lost in the Vaults or whatever stuff. Yeah. And it's tons and tons and tons. And I would love to, but I have to behave, because as you keep noticing, I'm pulling out the physical stuff. I don't know if it's an addiction. There's no support group, so it's technically not an addiction. That's my theory. So I'm in trouble if they come up with a support group for it. but I'd be tempted to go down and dig into those kinds of things because there's the potential of so much great stuff because they're just magnificent, great musicians, and they're working on yet another album.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
we are not the support group for that.
No,
in
we're
fact, you know what,
John, you
we're
were an enabler.
Yeah. We'll be at the
And I
record
don't-
store, and I'll be like, "Oh, Dave, I mean, when are you going to see this one again? I mean, come on."
Okay, and the hard part is, and you were right. So that goes back to the time we were at I'm trying to remember what the place was. It was the upstairs place or whatever, and I did get the Palace seed vinyl.
Yeah.
I passed on the Eloy
Right.
because, again, either of those two, where are you going to see them?
Yeah.
And I had to, oh no, I can't do that with my budget. And that was dumb move. I probably should have allowed you to be my enabler, and I, would have liked myself better after that, but oh well.
Yeah.
Oh well.
All right, John, number 4. Or actually number 5, since you're going backwards 8 to 4.
Yeah, I'm going backwards. So my 5th most influential, and again, influential, and we're going back to another one where it was on in our house all the time. And at the time, I appreciated it because it's really easy to listen to, and I was a child. And then I went through the period where I was like, okay, that's cheesy. I better not let anybody know that I grew up with this and that I secretly like it. And then coming back around to the point where I'm like, you know what? There's actually some amazing songwriting going on here and some amazing musicianship going on here. And the world's greatest female vocalist of all time. And that would be Karen Carpenter of
Interesting.
the Carpenters. So
I knew you were going where you were going, but I was surprised that you called Karen Carpenter the greatest female singer.
I mean, who's better? See,
you got to cut you off. This is not the time to argue against who's a better singer.
That'll be another episode.
I actually want to hear if Karen Carpenter's voice was the prime move that caused you to just dig into their catalog.
Yeah, it is. So, but like, Norah Jones, Natalie Merchant, so altos, I guess, kind of the lower, I don't know.
Okay.
Karen Carpenter's voice, it's just so silky smooth. I can't think of anybody better.
And one heck of a drummer.
Yeah. That's when I said musicianship. Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. Watching those videos of her playing drums on YouTube, it's crazy good. Crazy good stuff. So check out the Carpenters. If all of you all are just like you did a spit take, you spit out your drink or whatever when I showed the Carpenters, give them a chance. And think about it from this perspective of some good songcraft and some good musicianship and some really excellently produced records and excellently sung vocals. It's great.
Yeah. As an aside, did you ever listen to the compilation that came out in the mid-90s called "If I Were a Carpenter"? Where's all these? Yeah,
I have that CD.
Like Sonic Youth covering "Superstar."
Yeah,
which is really kind of fun and interesting.
Yeah, it was a fun CD. There were some misses on there, which I think was the Sonic Youth in particular.
Yeah, I didn't know that I didn't say good. I said interesting.
So yeah, you said it was there. It is what it is, but
yeah. So mine, and this is going to go off to a completely different direction, possibly for some, just because I'm not going down the prog or metal or hard rock, but I'm a sucker for really good, clever, catchy lyrics. And I mean, the Beatles have those in spades, but another artist that immediately comes to mind as far as like clever wordplay, and you really have to like parse his lyrics to really kind of understand what he's getting at. Elvis Costello. I remember first time hearing "Accidents Will Happen" off of the Armed Forces album. Again, it was in E.T. So I think that was maybe the first time I heard that. Then I saw the video shortly thereafter, and it was really kind of strange and kind of captivating that this nerdy looking dude, with this Buddy Holly looking guy with his Fender Strat was doing these catchy tunes, and then as you get older and you start paying attention to the lyrics, you realize how insanely clever this guy's lyrics are. And Costello is one of those that is an influence in me paying attention to lyrics, or I'll be listening to a song and I go, oh, that right there, that's a good look. That's a good line. That is a good, and like other songs that it takes you 3 or 4 songs to listens to hear about, oh, this is what this song actually is about. And Veronica for me is the gold standard for that, where the first couple times you hear that song, you think, "Ooh, that's a bouncy, fun pop song," and then you pay attention to the lyrics, and you realize it's about a woman who has dementia, and it just becomes a snap. It's just a heartbreaking, heart-wrenching song that just happens to be a toe-tapping beat, and that's the magic of Costello. Or his real name, Declan McManus.
Yeah. So,
fun little side story. When my wife and I were trying to have kids before we adopted our daughters, if we had a boy, his name was going to be Wesley Declan. And I got Declan from Declan McManus, aka Elvis Costello. Wow. So there we go.
And I ended up with the Wesley.
Yeah, I'm glad that didn't happen because it would have been awkward with our kids around.
Yeah, might have made different choices then. But I don't know. Did you read Costello's autobiography?
No, I want to though.
Huge. It is well worth digging into. It's a lot. I mean, tons of storytelling. You don't necessarily know, or maybe you do, but I didn't know because I've listened to a ton of his stuff. Tracking back to John, that youth pastor of yours, who kind of turned me on to Elvis Costello when I knew him in high school as well. So that kind of let's bring circles around and so forth. But digging into his autobiography, I was surprised to find out you don't talk about somebody who loves music and digs into all sorts of stuff, the way he would stitch together and pull different bits and pieces. And he talked about in his autobiography, just the way in which he would, for a different album or a different piece of music, he'd be drawing from different influences and really just piecing. It's kind of like the original version of sampling, where it's not kind of the rap sample kind of a thing where you're literally playing the stuff, but he's musically recreating a sample from and his own reinterpretation of some prior work somewhere, and he pulls a ton of stuff in from all over the place.
Yeah, and it's great because you listen to some of that. Especially when he has his sea legs and he has the power to call his own shots and really record the music that he did. And this is before he started doing the collaboration with Burt Bacharach in the 90s. But when he would pull here's a country influence, or here's some let's throw in a jazz quartet with horns, like New Orleans swing Dixieland jazz in the middle of the Spike album, which is, you listen to that the first time, you're like, what the heck is this?
I mean, this is a guy that did an album with the Roots. I mean, yes. Just because, why not?
And co-wrote songs with Paul McCartney.
Right.
The stuff that wound up on the Mighty Like a Rose album.
Yeah.
She's like just like Candy. That's such a freaking powerful song.
Yep.
And again, just a remarkable artist, and also kind of ballsy too. You have the infamous SNL stuff where he shows up and goes, "Yeah, we're doing radio. Screw you, Lorne Michaels and NBC." Gets kicked off SNL for 10 years. But then also, the one lyric, the song "The Other Side of Summer," where he managed to take down John Lennon and Roger Waters in one lick. Was it a millionaire who said, "Imagine no possessions"? And then right after that, calls out Roger Waters for the "We don't need no education" line from Another Brick in the Wall Part 2. It's like, damn, son.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
pretty much.
But that freaking Costello, and that's what makes
Declan don't mess.
Yeah. So anyway.
All right.
You're up.
So I'm going to go somewhere where both of you have already gone, because it had to come up. And this is one of the earliest vinyl bits that I have. And this has been played and played and played in my house, and it's just fantastic. The Mighty Led Zeppelin. I was going to make a joke because you said you listened to Led Zeppelin too. But since I was going to pull this later, I thought I'd actually wait and not actually ruin the joke. How do you just re-explain the awesome that is? You could make the joke. It's like, oh, my next selection is the new Yardbirds. Oh wait, no. Sorry, Rich. I thought you would enjoy that one. Just what's amazing to them was you had a very experienced Jimmy Page, similarly to some degree experienced John Bonham, if I'm recalling correct. No, John Paul Jones was the other that was a little more on the experience side, because I think Bonham and Plant were kind of like the young bucks kind of a thing, if I'm remembering this correctly. So. Now I'm going to sound too young, and I'm not. What am I talking about? But definitely, Plant was on the young side by comparison. But you got Page, who's putting together a new version of the Yardbirds. It becomes something different, and I think rock music, period, is glad that it became something different, because they set a standard. They didn't. From influence, there's others obviously that are influencing more. I've got another one in this list that's out influences them. In fact, actually, while we were talking, I shuffled these two. This was going to be my last one, and I just had to shuffle this because I changed my mind again. But they are, I enjoy now reading on occasion rock biographies and reading about bands. This was the first band that I felt I needed in high school to read a biography about. But that was because their catalog was, at that point, you're coming into it, the catalog's complete. They've already moved on. They had done, Plant has got his solo career stuff. Jimmy's done little things. I mean, if you want to dig into it, I mean, even John Paul Jones has got some interesting solo albums, and you have the randomness of him showing up in Them Crooked Vultures. I mean, where does that combination come from?
Yeah, and where's their second album?
Please,
yeah.
In all seriousness, that's worth a revisit. And then you get the random stuff with like the doo-wop, whatever, the Honey Drippers. Thank you, Robert Plant. What are you doing in that moment? But
or him with Alison Krauss.
Oh, yes,
yeah,
that's cool. Which is the most interesting combination at this point. Yeah, but Zeppelin in their prime were unbelievable. Just from a musicianship to just the ballsy power out there, and just just a fantastic. I mean, wish that Bonham would have lived longer. Actually follow up with even the stuff that Jason Bonham has done, whether it's the band Bonham himself or some of the other stuff that he's done. I mean, even the Next Generation has done great stuff, but the mark that Led Zeppelin has made on music cannot be understated.
Yeah,
or cannot be overstated. Excuse me.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you had the lead clones that of the 80s that were sort of lambasted at the time, but now, right now, we have lead clones that aren't being lambasted, but are being embraced and are becoming quite popular.
You have the more known one with the Greta Van Fleet, but I will throw out there, because I did a Friday Finds video on this one, Jailer, which is another up and coming. I hope they have a taste of the success that Greta Van Fleet had, because I think Jailer is worth it themselves as well. But yeah, the impact that they're having, 50 years later after they've came out, and there's young kids who are cutting their teeth on it and jumping back in. I mean, that says a lot.
Right. Yeah, we kind of we joke a little bit about at our house about some of the all-time greatest bands ever that I love and that my kids actually didn't grow up with. And Led Zeppelin is one of those. And the reason is that period where my kids were small and were being exposed to all of Dad's music, and in a way where it has stuck with them to this day as young adults, I was in my I need to take a break from Led Zeppelin phase because it's played on the radio too much.
Sure.
So my kids didn't grow up hearing Led Zeppelin. So just a couple of weeks ago, one of my kids is talking to me about this great song. And they were like, Dad, you would love this. And I'm like, okay, play it for me. And it's Greta Van Fleet sounding exactly like Led Zeppelin. And I said, I've been talking about Led Zeppelin here for a little while now, right? Yeah, Dad, you like Led Zeppelin. I'm like, you would like Led Zeppelin. Get in there, check it out.
Yep.
You would dig it.
Mm-hmm.
It's timeless. It's timeless. I mean, a great riff is timeless, right?
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, my last one, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna try to double up. Forgive me for doing this. It's a genre thing. I'm trying to. Well, okay. Anyway,
you take your cheat. If you're gonna do it, do it.
Or maybe one of them needs to go to an honorable mention or whatever. Well, here's what happened.
Do it because it'll make me feel less guilty about when I do it. So
okay, good. All right. So in our earlier episode where we were covering like our top 3 most influential artists, I had Vangelis that I mentioned, who I saw at the movies, the opening of the movie Chariots of Fire with that iconic Chariots of Fire theme music where the dudes are running across the beach. And I was like, what? That got me into electronic music like crazy. But 1981, I was 9 years old.
Uh-huh.
But I had already been bitten by the film score and soundtrack bug. And I had to make sure, I had to check which one I grabbed. And I did grab the original. This is my copy that I got for Christmas when I was 5 years old or something. And it is the Star Wars soundtrack by John Williams. Before we recorded any episodes tonight, us 3 fellas were just sort of catching up on things and talking a little bit about some of the new music we've been hearing. And I had to admit that I hadn't listened to any of their recommendations yet because I was back on a John Williams kick for like the past week. That and then the influence of some stuff that my father was playing in the house. This is the part where I'm kind of doubling up. That was my gateway into a love of classical music then, in general. So in my little notes over here, I also have Johann Sebastian Bach. So that's kind of where I'm doubling up, is that through the influence of seeing Star Wars as a 5-year-old in the theater a couple of times and just being blown away by the music that is involved in telling that space opera story. I also got into, some of our all-time great music from, Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and all these great classics. So, so that's like my 4th most influential. So, I've become an avid film score buff, Yeah, I can talk to you about, we won't right now, but I can talk to you about the Danny Elfmans and the John Powells and this phase of Hans Zimmer versus that phase of Hans Zimmer. So anyway.
No, that's an interesting point because we're really focusing on just rock influence right now for these. But the influences for me were there too because we grew up listening to old recording, orchestral recordings of like Beethoven symphonies and Bach and the Walter Carlos stuff with a switch on Bach and that kind of all those great Moog records, because like when the Moog synthesizer came out in the late 60s, you had all these artists doing these one-off Moog versions of all these classical music and all that, and then you break off and then you discover like Herbie Hancock, like we talked about that a little bit before we recorded, and the jazz music that he recorded before Rocket, and that then leads you down a rabbit hole, and then you start digging through other instruments like the crazy stuff like Miles Davis and the bop stuff of like Coltrane and the piano of Brubeck, and that really just kind of like all of that stuff is just kind of this nebulous of this, not what we normally talk about there, but it really exists and really feeds a different part of the soul. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, so you cheated in a different way because I was just going to throw out 2 quick bands that should be on this, but there's only one room. So I apologize to the Ramones and Sloan because those groups need to be on this as far as influences. The Ramones obviously set the tempo for punk, and I think my cousin for turning me on to that when I was like 15, and then Sloan really I don't even know how to describe them, just great, perfect power pop, and really like influenced me to like just really dig deeper into crate dive a little bit more than I was already doing. But the band I'm going to close with, other than those two, is Radiohead. And I know we talked about Radiohead before, but for me, they have really allowed me to really kind of like get comfortable with exploring different genres within the same band, within the same format. And the fearlessness of them, how they record different things and do different soundscapes. I mean, they're alt rock, they're indie, they're progressive, they're ambient, and all these different categories that you can break Radiohead into are genres, subgenres that I actively dig into. And because of when they made the transition from OK Computer to Kid A, which was something completely foreign and weird and different, and I like that, and that made me think, hey, this is in one overarching category, but there's different types of music that can be under this umbrella, but they can explore all these different rivulets in there. And I think Radiohead, because of how chameleon-like they can be, really kind of helped me get a little more fearless in my exploration when it came to certain forms of rock, particularly in the indie genre. And I think my breadth of musical appreciation has become richer because of it. Not bad for the band that created Creep, right?
Yeah.
Whoa.
I just broke your brain. Did I blow your mind again?
Well,
I'm going to blow your mind club?
So to me, Creep is different. Like, it's not, I think you would maybe agree with this kind of idea, right? Like, it was this weird one-off like hit thing. Radiohead is way more than Creep.
Right.
So when you're talking about Radiohead, and I'm tracking with you. I'm like, yeah, he's talking about Radiohead. And then you mentioned Creep, and I was like, well, wait, what? I just sang that song the other night. We were playing Rock Band.
Yeah.
And I just sang that song while we were playing Rock Band the other night. But I just disassociated. I completely disassociated that I was singing a Radiohead song the other night until you said Creep.
I kind of like feel that exact same way about the Beastie Boys catalog.
Really?
Because you have License to Ill, and then you have the rest of their stuff.
Oh yeah. Have you seen the Beastie Boys story?
Much more than License to Ill.
Yeah. Have you seen the Beastie Boys story?
Yes. We got to talk about this on a different episode, but I will just say this. I walked away with such a great appreciation for how brilliant Adam Yauch was. He was the absolute soul of that band.
Yeah.
And you can see why when he passed, they're like, yeah, we're done.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the, I'm a Beastie Boys fan and been for a while. And, but one of the main takeaways, one of the things I learned and appreciated from watching the Beastie Boys story was that License to Ill really is an outlier from what they are about. So yeah, kind of to your point that you were mentioning earlier, they really became the Beastie Boys after that tour.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because they went out and created the pet sounds of hip hop, and then they all learned how to play jazz guitar instead of just being punk guitarists. It's like, what the heck? Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, they broke up. They kind of talk about it. They sort of broke up after the License to Ill tour.
Yeah.
Because it was like, it was destructive.
Yeah. We became the very people that we were making fun of.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
They talk about how they were making fun of frat boys and bro culture and all that with the I want to, you got to fight for your right to party and
girls.
and all that albums. And they were becoming that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
they moved to different coasts of the country. They took a break. And then someone made a phone call and they made that second album. And I feel like that's when they became the Beastie Boys.
Yep, I agree.
That being said, though, I just listened to License to Ill a couple of weeks ago, all the way through in one sitting, and it still was a really fun time.
Well, yeah. Why? But that ties back into Radiohead. Pablo Honey is technically part of the Radiohead catalog, but Radiohead, as we know and as I appreciate it, really starts with the Bends.
Mm.
Okay.
Well, there's a reason why I've heard that York was very reluctant to play or the band in general was reluctant to play anything from Pablo Honey in concert because they're like, this feels like a completely different band. So, anyway.
Well, and speaking of a completely different band, if you're wanting to keep up with stuff, Tom York and his new incarnation, The Smile, what, 2 albums and a live album at this point or something like that, and interesting. I mean, it gives you flavors of Radiohead because it's still got Tom York going on with it, but interesting, different interpretation.
The attachment from Radiohead, which I like that he's not trying to create Radiohead 2.0.
Right. Yeah. But again, you hear flavors. I mean, it's not a recreation, but it's not so far afield that you don't kind of catch some vibe from it or what have you. But
it's not like Tom York is doing a blues album all of a sudden.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if I had
Tom York doing the blues. Just
that's a special one there.
We're gonna cut that out, right?
Maybe we'll see. No, you might just be hosed right there, and there it is. Okay, so for my last one here, I don't know if I'm going to throw in a bunch of random stuff because there's all sorts of things that like some of the stuff you guys mentioned, whether it's the Iron Maiden would have been a great choice in there. There were plenty of times that there's all sorts of bands that you could throw into the mix of this. But Rich, you were talking before about when you were talking about Genesis and a band that can do a whole side of an album.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to throw down the gauntlet for the prog band of prog bands for me, and we need to go to Yes, and let's do 4 of them and do a double album and do 4 songs because we're Yes, and there is no such thing as too far over the top. And but that's not even my probably my favorite Yes album, Fragile. I mean, just talk. I mean, the artwork on there is just fantastic. That's another hallmark of these guys where you get like a relayer and various things, which this is, I mean, the artwork here, you think, okay, well that's beautiful, that's gorgeous, and then you get into the fact that it's all of that.
I'm honestly shocked, Dave, that you have not gone out and sprung for a Roger Dean print. I'm at this point, I follow Roger Dean on Instagram, and he's done shows in San Francisco, and it's tempted me to go and get things. His artwork is phenomenal. I've enjoyed it on varying other bands. Even as far afield as I think he did like the Osibisa albums or a couple of them, and he has a style. The Yes logo is branded to him. For me, the weird part in Yes is when they did the 80s stuff, which was the most popular and interesting. I'm catching back up on an old prog magazine from a couple of months ago when they're going over that big period where they were more popular than ever. That period probably saved their career. Yeah.
But it was very different from what came before it. Mm-hmm. And John, you were mentioning before about, going through the side projects from Genesis. After I got done with that, I took a look at, I could do the same thing with Yes. No, nobody can.
70 years.
It's not a possibility. And Rick Wakeman, in and of himself personally, is a large reason why. There are years where he puts out 5 and 6 albums in a year, and you just want to say, dude, please knock it off. Mm-hmm. And some of them are probably not 100% worth going into because after a certain point, it's just whatever. he's got his proggy stuff, he's got his non-proggy stuff. I mean, John, you may actually appreciate some of the stuff where it's much more straightforward, classical piano works, and he does plenty of that as well.
Yeah, like kind of almost like a, I don't know, but like it'd be in the new age section at the record store.
Right. Yeah, perhaps. Yeah. But for me, Yes is one of those bands in all the varying incarnations. They've delivered. They've had some rocky times recently. I think their last album is pretty solid. I think they're kind of getting their footing again, but it's, and for me, it's been a little weird. The kind of the post Chris Squire stuff for me was kind of like, doesn't feel right, because up until that point, every other album Chris Squire had been a part of, and somebody had to be that ongoing guy, and then you knew there was going to be a point at which he was no longer going to be with us, and there you have it. And John Anderson has come and gone a couple of times, and every once in a while I think it'd be lovely for him to be back in the fold again, but John Davidson does a decent enough job and actually is stepping up pretty well. And the scary part is they've got themselves set up with enough young blood in there where you start to wonder, they've passed their 50-year mark. Is this a band that will keep going post Steve Howe even? Because Steve Howe is really kind of guiding the ship really strongly right now, and to say he's no spring chicken doesn't even cover it. But it would be a tragic day for Yes, but I actually wonder if they're going to be a band that will keep moving and reinvent themselves until they're forced to stop. Because they seem to have themselves set up that way. And if they can keep the music quality going, okay, fair enough. I really would their early stuff, what I was showing before, that's the solid stuff. That's the really, there it is. If you're going to go back in, it's a lot to jump into. But you want to talk about musicianship, you want to talk about skill, you want to talk about, everything that was made fun of to some degree with 70s prog, they embodied it, and proudly. And it's like, yeah, but we can play. We can throw it down like nobody's business. And so for me, they just absolutely deserve to be on this list. There's umpteen bands that we could probably all throw out there, but that's the last one I'm going to throw in there because they're just monumental in my mind.
We are at that point where these legacy bands that defined genres before we were even old enough to talk about bands. Some of them can still play and still tour.
Yeah.
With, like you said, maybe one original member or one key member that goes all the way back to the 70s or whatever. But there are bands where I believe they are brands.
Yeah.
And I see a future. I think Kansas is doing this. I see a future where you're going to go see Kansas or Yes, and it's a cover band essentially. But the way the band members changed, happened in a way where they can still call themselves the band's name.
Yeah.
Well, because they've existed for so long, they have enough longevity, and you've got a guy in the band or a couple of guys in the band where they're not a part of the original group, but they've still been there for 20 years.
Yeah.
And you're kind of like, how do you argue? And maybe you do, and some of the time I struggle with this, but to some degree, it's like, how do you say to a guy who says, no, I've had 20 years in this band, that's a long run, but I still, that guy still got, I got another 20 years in me, so why not?
Yeah.
And at that point, you got a band that's like, a band's been around for 75 years. And you're going to go, how is that even remotely possible?
Right. Yeah.
Well, it's, and maybe some of us as fans will struggle with this. Probably, at least it's not the Kiss approach where, what is it? The band is becoming avatars of themselves or something like that. Or I tried reading up on that one and I almost lost my lunch over it, but
is there a buck to be made? And that's why Kiss is doing it.
Well, and that's the thing, and that's one I could care less whether they did it or not, because I don't care. great. They're a great live band. So what? There's a reason they're not on any of our lists here. Which our point is not to disparage a band, and of course
Right.
I've gone there anyway.
Multiple times, in fact.
Whoops, and there it is. But from the positive side is maybe what that gives is the opportunity for the brand to continue. I mean, Kansas is still doing great music. In fact, actually, the last run of a couple of albums has been fairly good. The stuff that was at Inside Out Records has been putting out. I mean, they've been doing good stuff, and you kind of want to like, okay, yes, it's a brand, and yes, is a brand, and there's some struggle with that. So, like, I think that's where historically John Anderson has had some struggle with the band, where it is more about the brand, and there's some downside to that. It does provide longevity. And maybe what that'll mean is that, yes, style of music continues. Will it be worth it? Time will tell. Again, the last album seemed pretty decent. The couple prior, I could have said, you guys need to stop. So we'll see. Are they going to dip back into stuff where I don't care for it again? Maybe. Or they might hit another run of solid and good, well worth it albums. You just don't know.
Yeah.
All right. And I think that covers it. So thank you so much for checking this out. And please, if you have any comments about where we were wrong, especially if you really want to tell Dave how much you really like U2
or Kiss,
go for it in the comments down there.
Just let me have it, you colossal jerk. What is your problem?
Well, yeah, yeah. There's next time where we break down the Edge's guitar work and his pedal work. Anyway,
but throw in there, what are the colossal misses? What are the things where you just say, hey, this is a band that should have been in there? And there's probably plenty of them that we might even agree on to say, you know what, these were near misses that had a great influence on us, but at some point you had to cut the list off.
And it was hard to do so.
Truly.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We got any? You want to do any honorable mentions?
Throw some out there. I mean, okay, so some interesting ones that really had some fun. I mean, you guys had mentioned the Iron Maiden, so that would kind of hit for me.
Yeah.
I might throw an AC/DC in there. They churn out the same album every time they put out an album, but I want to listen to it every time.
Yeah.
Most of their albums hit that way. Maybe even a ZZ Top could throw in there.
Oh, yeah.
That might be a possibility. I didn't include Genesis in there, but I might. If the list was longer, I think they might have hit somewhere in there. You got what else do you guys got?
Go ahead, John.
I almost had Jethro Tull in there, and then Metallica. I almost had Metallica in there.
Yeah. No, Metallica could be in there.
I was dabbling in the hard rock stuff, and then Metallica was the one that totally tipped me over, and I was a metalhead and started growing my hair long.
Yeah, I mean, I already mentioned a couple of mine. The Ramones, Sloan, Jethro Tull is definitely in there for me. AC/DC was one that I considered as well. And there's a couple other artists that I can't remember right now. But I'm going to keep myself, and when we record, I'm going to say, hey, I remember this artist.
I'll throw one more in there. And John, I think you'll appreciate this. I'm going to throw Neil Morse in there and all the various solo stuff that he's done, because I think that I don't think it met the cut for his stuff. And I ended up backdooring my way into Spock's Beard through Neil after he was out of Spock's Beard.
Yeah.
But he was another one that opened the door to a variety of other types and other bands and other things that he's done. And you start tracing down rabbit trails to the different people he's worked with. So yeah, Neil Morse could probably, if we had an expanded list, I think I might throw him in there somewhere.
I agree.
I remember the other artist that I was thinking of.
There you go. Right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Come on.
Yeah, that's for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
And another one, Elliott Smith.
Oh yeah,
interesting.
Okay. Yeah, it really got me down that hole of just great pensive lyrics, great just soft acoustic. Yeah, And that's just scratching the surface. I know there's a few others, but yeah.
So there you go. Comment, throw in all the stuff that we missed, all the things that you think would be a great addition to things that influenced you. And we will come back at some point and do another similar one, but this time talking about 3 bands that are currently kind of reshaping the way in which we view music and are kind of sending us on and inspiring us to dig into more stuff. Because, you know, even at our age, there's more stuff out there.
Yep.
It's always the fun part of music. There's always more. There's just always more.
More. And, you know, that's why I didn't mention Stephen Wilson. But, yeah.
But I had to go there.
Yes. So what should we do with, should we like and subscribe? How does this work, John?
Yeah.
Please, I think people should do that.
Or the YouTube fans and denizens and all that.
Leave us the comments, all that good stuff. We appreciate you watching. We love the engagement.
All right.
Bye-bye.
All right.
Until next time.